Good morning, Great Connections listeners. I'm joined today by JT from Franklin's Charging. JT has an awesome charging business that I kind of came across originally on Kyle Connor's Out of Spec YouTube page. And thankfully, I was able to reach out to him, and JT decided to join us today for today's episode. So, JT, thank you for joining us. And can you just give us a real quick intro about how this all started and what you're doing right now?
Absolutely. Hey, Chase. We started, I started, I should say, looking at DC fast charging infrastructure and charging infrastructure in general around 2010, 2011, when I became aware of what Tesla was doing and coming to market and thinking, if these guys are crazy enough to actually pull it off, then there's going to be a great need for the Navin R. Johnsons of the next generation, and I'd fancy myself as a jerk-like figure. So I was like, okay, let's look into it. So that's when we really started kind of looking at how do you make this work. And of course, on the front end, there's a lot of naivetes when your background is like biology and chemistry. You don't, and I was just then starting to get into night school. I was a school teacher teaching biology and physical science, and started really trying to get into, okay, how do you make something like that work? And so in the meantime, I thought, well, I need to be more financially literate. So I put myself through an MBA at night school while I was teaching, and focused on Tesla, and then focused my business modeling on how do you charge these things and actually make any kind of money off of it.
I think that's a great overview. And what you hit on there at the end is probably one of the biggest questions a lot of people have about the space. And I think it was great to hear that. Obviously, it's taken some hard knocks, but definitely went in with a plan. And what you're being able to do and kind of now scaling up is already generating quite a bit of revenue and obviously a lot of interest. So I think just with all of that, can you talk about, I think, really what kind of made you, when you're doing all this research, what made you decide that charging was what was needed, and more charging locations? And I think specifically the way you approach it is really interesting because it's more in like the traditional, uh, I would say maybe even high tier, but like traditional gas station experience where there's things there. And I know that's selling it short because you have a lot more than that just at your location. So I would love to kind of hear how you got to that, and then some of these supplementary businesses that you've built on the actual locations as well to really make it a awesome place for EV chargers and even people just in the area to stop by and check out.
Yeah, Chase. I mean, that's you start looking at cash flows, and you can put all the numbers you want to together before you start. And again, I was very naive to what a demand charge is, or what I'm actually paying on a commercial setup for kilowatt hours. So I did as much background research as I could, but was still fairly green coming into this whole thing. And so it was basically like once we were able to raise the capital to actually do the build out of our first station here in Little Rock. I'd already acquired that land, and then subsequently acquired the shop next door to that. My lady is a potter, and so if you've seen the Kyle Connor video, then you know that we have an artist co-op next door now. Well, we put that commercial project together first, and I gave them a sweetheart deal on a lease. Well, that's the cash flow, right? So you start putting these cash flows together, everything goes into a pot, because on the front end that it's going to be very difficult to try and drive enough traffic to your location to be able to make the cash flows work for just the charging end of it. I knew that before I ever even got started. And so originally we had planned our Little Rock location to be a restaurant. When I was seeking financing, I'd spent a lot of time in my younger years in the restaurant industry. And so thought, okay, well, you put booze and food together, and if you're lucky enough to be able to make your margins on the food, then the booze should follow, and you make pretty good margins on that. So that would maybe support our charging habit. And so once we were actually able to raise the capital, the plan changed, and it was like, okay, let's not do that. Let's do more of a kind of an autonomous all hours lobby with the vending machine and that kind of thing set up. So you talk about ancillary cash flows. We made sure that we had air station slash vacuum on site in Little Rock, which is actually a little beast as far as money making. We have the vending machine. We've just now opened our coffee bar 3 days, 3 mornings a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday in Little Rock. and have really tried to kind of get, all of our methods behind us on that. I was never a barista, but I was a bartender, so that's it. It's fair, fairly similar kind of job description there. But anyhow, so kind of just putting all those together, and then it was like, okay, well, we need another big cash flower, and so the Little Rock location. Again, with my biology background, chemistry background, I found this company. I've been watching them for a long time, Freight Farms, and so I thought, it would be super cool to be a farmer at the same time that we are farming electricity and selling that. And so we
And not
bought.
to cut you off, I think for anyone listening who might not be familiar with Freight Farms, because it is an amazing company, it's one I've been following for quite a while too. And I think what makes it so fascinating is it's essentially these large drop ship containers that have small farms ready to go that you can start growing quite a few different crops at. Can you maybe explain a little bit more about that and how you got involved with them?
Sure. Like I said, that's with the background that I already had, and then on the front end of my teaching career, I used a small grant to buy a little hydroponic setup for my kids, and we messed with that for years, and I never could really get that going. When I found Freight Farms and started watching what they were doing, and then finally we decided we were going to go ahead and do the development here, and we're lucky enough to do that. I thought, okay, instead of the restaurant, let's be farmers because that's fun. Everybody loves it anyway, and potentially that would be a good cash flow machine. So, we just went for it, and at that point, we found out that there was probably, for us anyway, there was like a really steep learning curve for like a year to try and really get our operations down. We were lucky enough that one of our initial partners or two of our initial partners that we partnered with stuck with us through our hiccups on the front end and are still customers today, which is fantastic. Distributing to restaurants, which is a little bit easier than trying to do a retail type of situation. And then, of course, make sure that we are under, it's a boutique law or whatever for farming, to how you can sell that without having to involve yourself too much in Department of Health and all that. Still following best practices, but without having to have all the certificates and everything that goes along with that. So Freight Farms is pretty good about being in the realm of having the crops that you grow in that vein. So it makes it easier for the farmer to be able to get their products to market. But right now, I mean, currently we're ramping up our capacity for basil again. That's really our cash crop, and so currently we're doing about 50 pounds a month of basil, and we're about to get close to doubling that. We are doing sage. We're doing, oh, goodness, dill. And then we have romaine as well. And so romaine was really what I wanted to focus on. Come to find out, your head lettuces are not real good cash flowers, not great money makers, not a lot of margin there. But that was me thinking, okay, as far as logistically, and the amount of water that we use to try to offset anything we can coming out of the valleys out west that are desperate for water and having to cut back anyway. That was kind of part of that mission. It's all about sustainability, right? And so we're looking at the future and thinking, how are we able to do this all in the future and feed everybody and get them the electricity? And so we have, the solar setup that helps supplement our electricity, some stationary storage on site, which we hope to upgrade in the future, and just putting all that together. But as far as going back to the Freight Farm, I know I'm getting off topic, but the Freight Farm, again, it took us about a year to really get all that rolling, and we're still building to where we're going to have more produce and especially like microgreens. We want to do those, but we've got to get the rest of this online before we can use our seed table to really do microgreens all the time. So that's kind of I just happenstance ran across Freight Farms and loved to set up. Was just doing research about hydroponic grows and came across them. Did some more research, talked to the company, and that's the route we went there. And I'm glad we have.
No, and that's just great to hear because it is such a fascinating company. And I guess to clarify, how many is it just one shipping container, and what's roughly the size, or how many of them do you have at each location?
So we only have one Freight Farm. It's at our Little Rock location. It's a 40-foot shipping container. The company boasts that annual output is equivalent to about 2.5 acres, which on
Wow.
an annual basis, yes, I can see. At any one point in time, no, we don't have that much produce in there. But on an annual basis, yes, we can put out that much produce and are working toward making that a reality. But there's always, always challenges to keeping an aseptic environment, to making sure that everything is not getting any kind of infection. I mean, we've had on the front
Right.
end, we got an algae bloom, or a equivalent to a bacterial infection kind of thing. And so it was like, okay, well, we had to rip everything out and start over. And
Oh
so
man.
lesson learned, money spent, and let's move forward. So uh, maybe I got off topic again, Chase. But
No, no,
that's
no. I mean, it's all very fascinating. And I think it's really, I think what's really great just how you approach looking at kind of the cumulative cash flow for scaling up a business that a lot of companies are having trouble to just do one of. And you're right now scaling up the second one, and you're in Arkansas, which I think a lot of people would be kind of surprised, just given it being maybe one of the states with less EV adoption. But to see everything that you're doing, kind of not only future planning, but also finding these other kind of new technologies to supplement the business is such a very fascinating thing that I think our listeners will be pretty uh, just excited to see more about it. And to anyone that is listening that's going through Arkansas, please check out Franklin's Charging in Little Rock and also in Hot Springs, because I think both of these are just going to be phenomenal additions to what makes kind of an EV road trip so much fun. But I think to go a little bit back, can you share kind of maybe how you mentioned kind of some of the things you've put at the location and building these different cash flows, but as far as the charging side of it, can you share what was kind of how you came to the current amount of chargers you have on site, and anything that you're seeing is kind of where the right pricing and market is for that, and how maybe you even plan to expand from there?
Sure. So our Little Rock site is a little under a half acre altogether. And so when we started putting it together, and putting the plan together, speaking with my architect and the engineers, and then looking at what was going to be the future of what is the standard, and we kind of already had in our heads that 150 kilowatts per pedestal and 4 pedestals. Now we didn't start there, but so we knew that with a larger location, a larger for us location, that we wanted at least 4 pedestals. So that's what we went ahead and built out in Little Rock. And then when we got to Hot Springs, and I found this old filling station in Hot Springs, there were only 2 old pumps, and the old portico was there where the pumps were. And so when we did all the underground and the site work, etc., we just went ahead and duplicated that, and then of course ran some more pipe under the concrete to add one on site later if we would like to, that's not under the portico. But kind of looking at a boutique type of setup, I mean, it's at it not right again. Right now we're running CPE 250s, 2 in Little Rock, 2 in Hot Springs, and then we've got a FreeWire Boost 200 here in Little Rock as well. And so we're still a pedestal less than we could be with capacity there. We've got Tesla destinations at both, which I just leave on. Some people take advantage of them, not many. Most people want to try to support the small business end of it. But every once in a while, somebody will come plug into the Tesla destination. But then we have NEMA 1450s at both sites that could double as both an EV plug and then a um, oh goodness, food truck plug, which is
Oh
kind of
wow.
what we're looking at doing there as well. And so that's just kind of trying to future proof underneath as well. We put in the CPU 250s with ChargePoint, really like their hardware, but we went ahead and made site ready for the Express Plus units as well. So we wouldn't have to rip out any concrete later. And we have plenty of tubes that are plenty big for whatever kind of setup we want to put underground in Little Rock and in Hot Springs.
Well, and I
So
think
that's
for people who are listening who don't know the difference, can you share kind of what the Express Plus would unlock for your locations?
Sure. So CPE 250 units, as far as fast charging goes, you'll see them all over Colorado. I think the state of Maine has been really proactive about putting them in, Georgia, et cetera. That ChargePoint's a very popular brand new. The CP250's output, max output per unit is 62.5 kilowatts. You can pair the units, which we do. So a total output of 125 kilowatts out of each one, which is limited on many vehicles by I believe it's 200 amp cable that's associated with the units. But the Express Plus it touts a modular setup where the units that are internal right now that look like big AirPods, AirPod cases, that are the actual drivers for the DC or whatever. Their Express Plus, that is actually like a cabinet, and you can scale that to where you would start potentially with like 150 kilowatts a unit, and you can scale up to, I believe, 800 total kilowatts over maybe 2 units, maybe 4. I don't know. I spoke with a ChargePoint guy earlier this morning, actually, one of their SVPs, and so we're looking at the different types of setups there, but he's going to send me more of that literature tonight so I can get a little bit more read up on that before we would potentially ask for NEVI monies. But essentially what it does is it just allows us to, in place with the underground that we already have, to go from an outfit that's doing, right now, what, 325 kilowatts of DC, to up to, I mean, we could do a lot, but I mean, what we would look at for the next step up would probably be more on the order of a megawatt.
Oh, wow. Big step up.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why we got in bed with FreeWire, is they already come equipped. Their units already come equipped with stationary storage in the units, so they really only eat about 37 kilowatts off the grid per unit for a 200 potential output out the front.
Right, which is kind of a really interesting technology. I'm not sure a lot of our listeners are aware of. Essentially, what it does is it has a battery inside the charger itself, so that for a couple of reasons. One, not only does it make it a lot easier for sites that might not have a large potential to have a continuous power, but more importantly, it helps kind of negate some of the charges, especially demand charges and other things that pop up when you are doing EV charging. I think that's something probably a lot of our listeners don't realize on the back end, a lot of those costs and some of those things that come up. Can you share, I think maybe in 2 parts, it'd be interesting to hear, as you've kind of built this out, any things that have caught you off guard or surprised you, and then maybe kind of do an overview of some of the charges that, as a site provider, that you have to deal with and try to kind of almost manipulate and figure out how you can get the best return for your investment in the infrastructure, avoid the costs, and then also not have to raise the prices to the end consumer.
Well, I think it's probably best to preface that with, we've had some hiccups with our FreeWire unit, and I've been looking to raise our prices. Right now, we're only 30 cents per kilowatt hour on our ChargePoint units in Little Rock. We're 32 in Hot Springs, and we're 32 with the FreeWire unit, but we're about to go 35 across the board, which will help us get to our cash flow goals. But yeah, I mean, on the front end, I wasn't an electrician. I'm not an electrical engineer. So it was definitely a humbling experience to find out just exactly how much you pay for not just demand charges. I mean, that Entergy, and who is our local provider here at both of our locations in Arkansas. There are other co-ops in Arkansas at different spots, but that's who we're working with for our 2 installations. I don't know that they know exactly how to charge for DC fast charging yet. I've heard talk that they want to give a little bit of a break on demand charges for the first 5 years of an installation, kind of thing. Have not seen that come to fruition. You end up with a pretty good hit on demand charges. Then your kilowatt hours on a commercial setup are, I mean, you pay almost nothing. It's like 2 cents. And it flips season to season. You pay almost nothing. And so anything that we would potentially put back on the grid with our solar, which we have 30 kilowatt solar umbrella in Little Rock and about 15 in Hot Springs. So, I mean, it's very negligible how much of that we're able to offset with the actual DC, because if you're going to back up a DC unit, then you have to have a pretty substantial battery to do that. And we're just working with Powerwall 1s and Little Rock and Powerwall 2s in Hot Springs right now, 3 for each setup. And so really we're just backing up the farm and the sitting area slash bathrooms slash coffee bar in Little Rock. And I'm obviously running those batteries a little bit at nighttime to try and offset some demand. But yeah, I mean, that was a big surprise to me, that not only were those two costs associated with this commercial installation, but then this just mystery energy charge, which I'm supposing is a delivery charge, but I have yet to. I've looked all over the PSC, Public Service Commission's website with this literature to try and match my billing schedule with a schedule on there. And I can't find an exact match, but I've got one that looks like the same kind of deal, but I'm still trying to suss out what is this mystery energy charge? I mean, I'm paying more for that monthly than I am for a demand charge right now. And so, all in
Interesting.
all, at the end of the month, you end up looking at this huge bill and it's like, well, that just ate most of my profits for the month. So where do we go from there? Because then you have to pay for, obviously, if you have any kind of finance. We have one piece of financing in Little Rock on our FreeWire unit, and then we lease the charge point units. So that's a big yearly cost anyhow. So trying to suss out, okay, how many kilowatt hours at what rate do I need to be selling on a daily basis to break even there? And
Right.
so what we've come up with is 35 cents kilowatt hour, and we really need to be doing 1,000 kilowatt hours a day.
Per day.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. But I
Great.
mean, in the grand scheme, so right now in my numbers, I'm just and I may be a little off. I have my dashboards I look at and all that kind of good stuff for all of our units, but uh, you think about, well, what does that entail? What I'm saying, about an average of 35 kilowatt hours per charge, because you'll have a Nissan Leaf that does 12
Right. Right.
kilowatt hours in an hour, and then you'll have and I won't say Rivion's with the free wires because they're limited currently to 80 kilowatts, but you'll have an F-150 come and sit on that free wire station and pull 125 kilowatts and do it for 100 kilowatt hours. So that's those kind of charges. If you do 10 of those a day, then you got your numbers.
Yeah.
And that's between both sites, obviously. But that's our first milestone goal that we're working toward to get cash flow neutral, which we hope to be by the end of 24 with all of our operations. Now that's real estate cash flows and all the ancillary cash flows included, going into one big pot to try and make the whole thing work.
No, I mean, I think that's awesome. If anyone, I can't recommend watching the Kyle Connor out of spec video about the site location. I mean, it's a beautiful site. It's very well done. It doesn't, no means does it look like it's a cheap build. So to hear that you're able to kind of scale that and get to that point by even at 2024, I think it's an amazing return for those kinds of investments. When talking about the different chargers, I didn't realize that it was common to lease the charge point chargers. Are you kind of able to share some of the different models as far as what you are seeing kind of compared to like leasing the free wire system or the charge point? As of now, is there a model that you're kind of seeing makes the most sense for the amount of traffic you're getting or just financially with your business model?
Well, so again, ChargePoint really wanted to push the CPE 250s when we started with this whole exercise here. And that was 2017, 2018 is really when we were hitting the engineering hard on that end of it and talking to ChargePoint about what we were doing. So that at that time, 62.5 kilowatts, 125 paired, it was like, yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and my
And
apologies.
again,
I'm sorry not to cut you off real quick. When did the sites officially open for people to come and charge?
so official opening Little Rock, April 22. Hot Springs for charging and lobby officially February 23.
Okay, great, great. And I'm sorry, continue. That's really interesting though to hear how long it kind of takes to do the planning, getting everything together, and then to open then. But yeah, please tell me more about kind of the charge point and looking at the different models that were kind of available to you at the time.
Sure. Well, but before I say that, I will say that there was definitely a quiet period that we did not pursue this development in
Mm.
between 2018 and then 2020, and
Fair.
that was all about trying to secure financing. And so we, I kind of tabled it for a while, and then we just got lucky enough to where we were able to actually have the cash flows to do it, the equity to do it. So that being said, the charge point units, again, we've got the CP250s right now, and we're working our way up to the Express Plus. But the next step for us would probably be the 280s, which I believe with our financing with them, which is a lease. So with our lease, and then it's kind of a turnkey deal because they do their own software, they do their own hardware, and so the package that I have with these guys covers all repairs that aren't, that I mean, any kind of reasonable repairs. It covers all the software and all that for a yearly flat rate. And then in speaking with the SVP this morning in our area over at ChargePoint, apparently we are able to upgrade with a NACS plug for free.
Oh, wow.
And we're also able to upgrade to the 280 units for free, which would give us a capacity of not 125 paired, but 160 kilowatts paired. And so if that is the case, he's supposed to send me some literature this evening, and that's what we would look at as next immediate step here is to go ahead and upgrade to the 280s. And now I have spoken with them, and I don't think it's proprietary information, but I've spoken with them about a buyout type of situation. I mean, because you're at 5-year lease, they're gonna write that off their books. That they've got the
Right.
capital lease on that end of it, so they're gonna write that off their books and depreciation in 5 years and still get the cash flows from it. So, how much is it worth to you to have them sent back to California for refurbishment and potential resale versus me just keeping them and putting them down the road somewhere? Because that
Interesting.
that was kind of the plan from the beginning. Is at the end of the lease, can we just do kind of like any other car lease or whatever? Can we do a little bit of a balloon payment or whatever it might be for residual value at that point? Pick them up and take them down the road as we upgrade the site. And yes, is the short answer to that. That is an option. But in lieu of that, we may be looking at going ahead and trying to upgrade to the 280 units from the 250s here sooner than later.
Interesting. So with these kind of lease agreements, does that usually mean as the site host, you kind of have to figure out all of the electrical, all of it essentially up to the pedestal, and then you would lease those pedestals from ChargePoint, or is there a bit more that's kind of going on that they take care of when it comes to actually bringing these online?
Well, with our first two developments, that is exactly the case. Is that
Gotcha.
we took it right to the pedestal, and then we had the lease agreement for the units with them.
Interesting. Okay. And with I'm just generally curious. I don't know if this is something they sell or not, but in your kind of decision to go with leasing with them, whether you could buy them out or not at the end, do you think that there is actually kind of an element of the leasing brings down the total cost of the installation because traditionally that's a pretty expensive point. But more importantly, it might even give you some future proofing, like in this example, where they'll come out and upgrade those charge points for you.
Yes, I think that was my initial thoughts with the leasing was that, hey, 62 and a half kilowatts, 125 paired, ain't gonna cut it in 5 years. So let's do a lease instead of purchasing these units.
Fair.
And then as we started operating, and I started looking at, okay, so if we're actually able to get into the black, which was, that's the exercise for everybody with small business from the beginning, then how do we scale? And so, we're not going to be a Bucky's. So we would scale in a more rural area where you have people that are driving to whatever kind of, I mean, whether it's we have a Buffalo National River up in North Arkansas. It's a gorgeous area. There's nothing up there, nothing. So, I mean, if you had even a 50 kilowatt unit sitting there, that sucker would get used. I mean, you have
Yeah.
all kinds of people that have these adventure vehicles. I mean, go out and buy a Rivian R1T and then get up to, the wilderness area in North Arkansas, and how the heck do you charge?
Right.
So that was kind of the thought from the beginning is, okay, let's lease them. And then we'll upgrade when the time comes. And then as we've gotten more into it, it's like, okay, I'm interested in, is there a buyout option that would make financial sense to buy these, stick them up the road, and operate them for another 5 to 7 years before the units would actually be out of, out of warranty, out of an extended warranty kind of thing. And so that's something that we're still working out. But like I said, this morning's conversation that I had with the rep there, great conversation, super cool dude, and potential to upgrade our site without having to pay extra because of what we're doing with our lease package already. But it's like, oh, bonus.
Yeah, that's great. I am kind of curious with what you've already installed and some of these kind of first iteration of upgrades. Where do you see these sites maybe longer term? Like, are you expecting them to have maybe like 8 pedestals, or do you expect the total of total pedestals maybe just stay the same, but just increase the rate?
So the way we design Little Rock, we have our pedestal sitting in between 2 parking slots, right? So you could, if there are 2 heads that you can charge off of, then each person gets a slot that's already there and it's already ready made for that. So potentially you could have 4 units with 8 charging heads, right?
Gotcha.
So if you look at like, and again, I'll go back to Brandon Flash, Kyle Connor, those kind of guys that are very active on the Zitter. That Brandon has just gone to, from what I understand, and I don't know the guy personally, seems like a cool guy, but he's just gone to, I believe, Alpatronic.
Correct.
And
Correct. Yeah, we just
so
had him
that is
on a couple episodes ago. But yeah, he just
so
started
that's
Alpatronic.
yeah, so that's a European outfit, but this 400 unit that they're testing out East Coast, I mean, that's pretty killer, man. I mean, you got a pretty tight little package there with 2 plugs that has the 400 capability. Then the equation becomes, okay, how much stationary storage do I need on site? How much solar can I reasonably add to my site to actually offset some of the demand and then the energy charges that we would incur? But that's kind of the rationale in Little Rock. Again, in Hot Springs, we knew from the beginning, starting this thing, that's going to be a boutique.
Mhm.
A Tesla will eventually find there's horse races down there in a big casino. Teslas of the world are going to find that place eventually. They're going to build out there eventually. So what is our grab? Well, we're on the very edge of right downtown. It's a big attraction, and we're a boutique. I mean, we're going to have the 2 pedestals, potentially 3 in the future, and that's what we're looking at.
Yeah.
So that's it again, you start looking at, okay, well, what kind of hardware do you have for that? And like I said, we went ahead and planned for at least the Express Plus underground, so we wouldn't have to be pulling up a bunch of concrete and trying to trade that out later.
I'm kind of curious, just when you talk about like Tesla or the other charging companies that are kind of the space, given that that is just one part of your cash flow, have you, I'm sure you have, but
Uh-oh, did I lose you?
I'm just curious,
Oh,
like,
goodness.
uh, I was just curious how maybe you were looking
Can
at,
you hear me?
oh yeah, I can still hear
Oh,
you.
good God.
I can hear you. I'm not, you still there, JT?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. There was some kind of snafu with the phone there.
No worries. I can hear you fine though, but uh, I guess my question was, in this process, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who are listening that just find this really fascinating. Were there at any point that you were kind of looking at, maybe, I'm going to do the freight farm, I'm going to do the coffee shop, and maybe I'll just lease out some of this to Tesla or Electrify America or some other company like that? Was that something that ever kind of crossed your mind, or was it just you wanted to go all in and kind of have the vertical integration of the location yourself?
Either or. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, the thought's always there that, okay, you're in the business of doing this and trying to build yourself and the company around the charging. I mean, that's my goal, is to become at least a small regional player in the charging business, and then the ancillary conveniences that go along with like a C-store or whatever else that our
Right.
incantation may be of that. We go, absolutely. But then owning the site, you also have in the back of your head, okay, worst comes to worst, we don't have to be the operator. We have the infrastructure already built. So the Rivians of the world with their RAN network or whatever else, sure. I mean that you could say, okay, well let's explore getting in bed with one of those guys and having them just do the operations, and we'll just go climb a mountain or something. Um, but yes, that thought was there from the beginning of our exercise here.
Gotcha. And kind of looking at the space right now, what I guess I'm curious, what are you most excited about? Is it kind of getting these up and then building 3, 4 more locations? Or is it kind of leaning into the community that's already kind of come up with the current 2 you have and just trying to double down on what kind of cash flows you can build at those locations?
Both of those. I mean, number one is let's I'm pretty vested in this neighborhood that I'm in anyway, and I kind of grew up in this area in Little Rock. And then I grew up, going to Hot Springs when I was young as well. And it's a real kitschy little town too. So it's, freaks, geeks, and weirdos everywhere, in both of these areas. And both of them are being kind of having a second look, a little bit of a renaissance as well. And so I don't like to use that term that everybody uses for oh, I think it's gentrification. Yeah, we're not trying to use that term, but all the same, yes, being an active member of the community that's moving in that direction and building our businesses with that locally, and then with the thought of, okay, in the future, how do we scale? Where do we scale? And how do we do it with staying out of the shadows of the big players that are obviously going to eat a lot of little guys' lunch in the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense, and that's great to hear. I think anyone that is a current EV driver in your area, if they don't know of you already, I mean, it's such a cool looking setup that you have these 2 locations. And I know next time on a road trip, I'm in the area, I'm definitely going to even just take a detour to come check out in person because we just need to see more of these. Uh, I honestly around the world, but especially just across the U.S. And I think the location you've chosen is such a great addition for drawing people in. With the goals of scaling and trying to make Franklin's Charging into a larger player and have more locations, what in your experience has kind of been the biggest challenges? I think you've hit on a little bit, but what have been the biggest challenges for making DC public fast charging more common?
Well, I mean, number one, as it is with many businesses, but especially with something at its scale, is I mean, it's cash, man. Cash is king. So how do you come up with the capital that's necessary to do that? And so that's really the big part of any calculation to start any business. But it's like, okay, so how do you set something up? How do you get the cash flows there in the front end? How much runway do you have with your working capital? And then how do you make that all work? And then include okay, now we jump to the next step. And then when do you bring in outside investors, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't know of a more blunt way to put that, that this is, it's a blessing and a curse to have such a high barrier of entry with it being such a capital intensive kind of endeavor. And so you don't have just a whole bunch of others that are just trying to jump headfirst in. But then on the other hand, it's like, okay, but that costs a lot of money.
Right.
So how do you do that?
Okay, so the biggest issue is money. And then
Oh
once you
yeah.
have the money, what do you find is the biggest hurdle to put that money to work?
Oh, good Lord. I think I went through two electricians that I was like, oh, these guys are going to be awesome. It's going to work. And then they were smaller outfits that it didn't work, man. And my contractor, I used a smaller contractor when I started this thing because I wanted to use my subs and I wanted to learn how to build these things out from the beginning. So it's like I would have that knowledge implicit that nobody else is going to impart to you. I'd done some building in the past, but nothing on a commercial scale, and nothing like this. And so I definitely wanted to be able to try and learn how to turnkey a site myself with subs that I knew and people that I knew to be able to do that. Not that I want to open a construction company, but wanted to know that end of it for books and everything else. But um, that was painful in some aspects. I ended up with a larger electric outfit that was able to come in and really help me go from a really kind of nasty stopping spot in Hot Springs to getting it turnkey.
Interesting. Sorry to hear that, but I'm glad it's up and running now. If
Hey,
there's
lesson learned.
I guess you've already maybe mentioned a couple of these things, but for anyone listening that they think, oh, maybe I want to do something in my town or regionally or work with others to kind of make this more common, are there any recommendations or tips to think about when kind of starting something like this up?
It may be cliche and it may be true for whatever business, but do your research, put your numbers together. I don't know if you're familiar with a DCF, so like discounted cash flow, which you're going
Mhm.
to have some cash flows laid out anyway for financing if you go talk to a bank. But know those numbers, know them inside out. Do as much research as you can to see what your costs that you might not be including are going to be. Make sure you try to cross all your T's and dot all your I's, and then double that number.
That it makes a lot of sense, given everyone I've talked to that usually works for the other, even just traditional gas stations trying to make this change. They're realizing that there's a lot more cost that they weren't expecting with it. But I
Yep.
think that adds just to how impressive it is to see what you've done and kind of how fast your team's grown with it. Um, One of the things you mentioned earlier, I mean, obviously, uh, this industry's kind of run into issues around supply chain and the overall cost. And you mentioned earlier kind of NEVI funding. Is that something that, as you've kind of been researching, is that something you're cautiously optimistic about, or is it just, in your experience, any sort of kind of outside thing that might be a government funding? Has it just been moving too slow to be of benefit so far for you as you're trying to grow your business?
Chase, to be honest with you, I'm glad it's getting rolled out slowly.
Okay.
I now that we're already up and running here, a couple things. Number one, the state of Arkansas had the VW settlement monies, and so that was for
Mm.
on the DC side of it, that was for and still is for 150 kilowatt plus units, and two of those that they would set aside that funding yearly for I think 5 year period on that one too. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, I applied for the first year of that one. And I wrote my own quote unquote grant and put my numbers in there. And I was already starting to operate the charge point units in Little Rock. And so had some legit experience there. And then came to find out really quickly that between Entergy, our local provider, Francis Energy, who is born out of some I think oil and gas in Oklahoma, that's putting them up everywhere as far as DC goes, and Shell. That those guys probably had not just better grant writers than me, but probably had some lobby pulling as well, abilities to grease enough palms to be able to be a little more competitive than a little guy like me. Now, on the back end of that, now I've gotten great feedback from the state and their programs. They've been very communicative with me about what's out there. The NEVI funding on the front end, when we got this thing done in Little Rock, Arkansas Department of Transportation did a story about charging, and they came out and did a lot of pictures at our place and interviewed me and put that into their issue for that year or that season. I think they do it by yearly, but anyway, so they printed their mailer or whatever with their magazine with our station on it, and then in the article as
That's
well,
great.
pictures of our station. In addition to that, they went ahead and earmarked us for an upgrade with NEVI monies
Oh, wow.
in Little Rock. And so that's not to say we're a shoe in for anything like that, but we're right now it's all about cash flows, right? I don't want to throw another, big chunk of money at this thing and then have these other stations that I need to put down the road somewhere before we are able to actually make these cash flows work.
Right.
And so it's like, let's get all systems going. Let's figure out where we are with our numbers. So, yes, is the short answer to that. We are very interested in the NEVI monies, especially for our Little Rock location, because it's eligible. And it's already been earmarked apparently by Arkansas Department of Transportation. So we think we'll be very competitive there when we're ready for it. And we're looking at probably, if our cash flows are increasing and growing like we're looking at right now, into 24 going into 2025, we would look at really doing the deep dive and get in the weeds, which we're already going to do at ChargePoint after my discussion this morning. He's going to send me a bunch of literature about their NEVI funding packages. But we're looking at least trying to do that in Little Rock for sure.
That's great. And when you say Little Rock is eligible, what makes that location, I guess, better or eligible for NEVI funds versus the Hot Springs location?
The corridor, the earmarked
Gotcha.
corridors where yeah.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, that is all very exciting. And I'm sure just kind of adds more, I was going to say fuel to the fire, but maybe that's the wrong analogy for this, but definitely just really seems to take the momentum you've already got going and really make sure. I mean, it sounds like you have such a solid kind of business plan, and having just the additional revenue sources really are kind of making you be able to scale this to a very sustainable and lucrative even size. When you look forward, you've kind of mentioned some of these site locations with the solar edition. It helps, but it's not really a huge thing. Have you explored or kind of looked at doing larger solar installations in the future with more battery backup, or is that just, it just doesn't really pencil out?
It depends on how you pay for it. Again, if you
Gotcha.
get a grant for NEVI monies and you've already
Fair.
put into that grant, 100 kilowatts of solar umbrella or 200 kilowatts of solar umbrella, and you're going to have up to a megawatt of charging for future installations that are going to cater to semis and or larger vehicles, and you're doing that on the side of a highway, and you've got a Tesla Megapack there with 1.9 megawatts worth of stationary storage, where you can mitigate how much of the grid you're using anyhow, and then add to at certain times.
Yeah.
Then that does start to pencil out possibly, but I have not done that financial exercise yet, because I'm looking at what's right in front of me and
Right.
thinking,
Right.
okay, next 5 years, we want to go into the black, and we want to scale the units that we already have into different locations, and hopefully the next 5 years at least have 4 or 5 locations that were actually in the black making money on.
That's great. I mean, with kind of this talk of scaling, what have you seen been traditionally, I guess, have there been any big hurdles financially that you're seeing starting to change with the increase and maybe changes in the supply chain, or just scaling up of technology? Like, are you seeing a decrease in the price of pedestals and kind of charging infrastructure, or is it still kind of remaining about the same because of the demand?
I mean, to be completely honest with you, I have not done a lot of shopping lately
Gotcha.
for new pedestal or for new
Fair.
machines. But the shopping that I have done, yes, it looks like that the costs are getting more reasonable as the years go by, which is any new technology, right? I mean, the
For
original
sure.
LCD TVs or whatever were $5,000, and you can buy a flat screen that's perfectly fantastic and has more features than that now for $600.
Right. Right. With the current kind of infrastructure you have with these two locations, and they're being competitors, but obviously you guys having a much higher tier experience when someone goes to charge, are you seeing kind of any trends with who is coming to charge at your location, or is it still pretty early days and it's kind of the only option that a lot of people see as being somewhere they want to stop when they're on kind of a road trip, or is it kind of maybe more of a local crowd or a mix of both that are coming to your charging locations?
So from what I'm seeing so far with let's start with Little Rock. Little Rock, holidays. So holiday
Mm.
travels, you see more people coming across country, or you see more people coming to visit family that are in town, and then finding us and being able to charge quickly while they're around, kind of thing. And then other times, just normal weeks or whatever. Like this today, I've had, oh goodness, in Little Rock, we've charged what 10 or 11 cars so far today,
Oh, wow.
and almost all of those are local folks.
Oh, that's great.
Um, so, and then the weekends it'll pick back up with folks traveling. And so Hot Springs is, again, it's pretty slow still in Hot Springs, but what we're seeing is the draw of that being a little resort town, and then having gambling and horse races. Now that the racing season has started again, I've seen some out of towners, and then I have a couple of locals that are around, and then there's really nothing in that area. So people that are in more rural areas, as they pass through, they're stopping there as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm also just curious. I'd imagine. I mean, that's how I came across you. Have you seen a kind of bump in interest or people visiting since the original video you did with Cal Connor?
Yeah, I've had several that have come across. I
Nice.
mean, I had a family come out of, oh my God, those people were brave. Coming out of Atlanta in a Bolt
Oh,
and
wow.
going cross country in it. Jesus. And they had the whole family packed in that thing, and had seen the video, and their 6-year-old wanted to take a picture with me. I mean, it was internet famous, I guess. I was like, oh my God, okay. So yeah, I've seen that several times now, which is kind of cool.
I mean, that's great to hear, and I hope some of our listeners are able to give you a boost as well. But congratulations, that's awesome to hear. I think we've covered a lot of really great topics, and kind of the questions I had for someone in your position who's being very entrepreneurial and kind of pushing the edge of really making not only charging locations that are reliable, but actually places where people want to stop. But there is one kind of final question that I ask a lot of our guests, and the question is, in your experience, what are some innovative ways that either the private industry or government can maybe help accelerate the rollout of EVs and charging infrastructure?
Aside from what this infrastructure package that got passed and is getting implemented with the NEVI monies, aside from something like that, where it's basically subsidizing owner operators to put in new infrastructure, I would say that definitely the regulated monopolies that are our energy providers that are also trying to scale, that they try to form more partnerships with people that are in this business or want to be in this business, even the Teslas of the world that are the big guys, to put in the stationary storage and the renewables, whatever may be most suitable wherever that location is, to and give breaks, possibly take off a demand charge or whatever, or levelize that for a number of years before everything just goes full tilt.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious, you mentioned the utilities. With these locations, have you also had kind of issues around transmission and getting the power that you really want or need at those locations?
I mean, in Little Rock, we are literally across the street, in between the freeway and the street, to a substation. And so, no, nothing in Little Rock. I had to bring three-phase power over to the site,
Mhm.
from across the street. But same thing in Hot Springs. Three-phase power. We don't have the substation there, but three-phase power was already available across the street. We just had to bring it across and set a transformer.
Oh, great. Well, that's about as good as it gets if you only have to bring it across the street. But JT, I just want to say thank you again for this. Has been really interesting and super informative. And I know our listeners are definitely fascinated by people like yourself who are really building and kind of pushing the infrastructure and making it much more accessible for a lot of people and making a much more enjoyable experience for everyone. So, JT, thank you again and look forward to having you on again soon.
Chase, I appreciate the exposure. Appreciate your time. Thank you.